good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us during this Saturday interview prep webinar. I'm going to have a few slides just to go over a few thoughts about my approach to interviews and some of the most common questions. And then I just wanted to leave a lot of open time for people to ask questions and to answer any particular concerns or questions that people have. So just by way of introduction, my name is Majd. I am currently an electrophysiology fellow at Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee. I graduated from medical school at Imperial College London in the UK, so I am an IMG, and I graduated in 2015. I then did my internal medicine residency at in Rochester, Minnesota at the Mayo Clinic from 2016 to 2019. Then matched for cardiology fellowship at Vanderbilt in Nashville, where I completed general cardiology fellowship, and I did an additional year of a master's degree and an AHA research fellowship through the American Heart Association. And I'm currently in my second year of a 2-year cardiac electrophysiology fellowship. I have interviewed for internal medicine, for general cardiology, and for EP. And I'm currently actually interviewing for my first job since I'll be completing my medical training in June of 2025. And as part of my roles within the fellowship as chief fellow, both for cardiology and for EP, I've actually sat on the selection committee and interviewed people and listened in on the discussion after the interviews for 3 years. So 2 years for general cardiology and 1 year for EP. I've also been working for the Match Guy I started last year. And so I have about a year's worth of experience, mentoring and working with people for interview prep as well. And so just going to start off with just some general advice. I do want to let everybody know that the interview is going to be a very, very nice experience. Everybody is very nice. I think a lot of people are a lot more worried and nervous than they need to be. The interview itself tends to be very conversational. You'll find this after your first few interviews. The interviewer is really just trying to get to know you. They're going to ask you questions about your life, about your experience, about certain things that you wrote in your ERAS just to get a little bit more information from you. So it's going to be very conversational. And part of the interview is for them to answer questions about the program and for them to try to sell you the program because it's also a two-way street. Just some general advice, especially since a lot of interviews are still Zoom-based interviews. Don't forget to smile during the interview. I think a lot of people are very nervous and tend to just forget to smile. They want to see that you're a nice person and that you are somebody who can just be a good person to talk to and have a conversation with. It's also important to make sure that you're cognizant of your lighting and your background. You want to make sure that you have good lighting. Background, try to have something neutral, like a bookshelf or something, nothing too crazy. My personal preference is to try to avoid having beds in the background, but I don't think it's a big deal if you do. But just try to make sure that it's clean and something that just looks very, normal. A lot of people go crazy and have these like plants and, all this stuff, you don't really have to go out of your way to give yourself an amazing background, but just make sure that it's something neutral like a bookshelf or something like that. Mind your facial expressions at all times. This is something that's really important as well. It's very easy, after a long day, or especially if there's a time difference, just to look bored either during an interview or during a general session. You just have no idea who's looking at your screen. You just want to make sure that you're always looking engaged and interested, nodding, just showing that you're actively listening to the person that you're talking to. Always make sure that your Zoom and your Teams has access to the camera and the microphone. You'll notice that I think a lot of us are more comfortable with Zoom. I think we've all used Zoom a little bit more, but a lot of programs, including my own program, have shifted to using Microsoft Teams. And so the first time you use Microsoft Teams, you need to go into your setting and make sure that you have given Teams access to the camera and the microphone. And so that can cause some delays. I notice this because sometimes when I'm doing prep session with applicants, I'll send them a Teams link because, again, my program has shifted towards Teams and I only have the 40-minute free Zoom session. And a lot of people have trouble logging on to the Teams and getting, access to the camera and the microphone. So just be mindful that a lot of programs have now shifted to using Microsoft Teams. So try to make sure that you give access within your computer settings to Microsoft Teams. Practice with others so that it's not your first time doing it, but always take everybody's advice with a grain of salt because, if you practice with 10 different people, everybody's going to give you a little bit of advice and everybody's going to give you different feedback. And so always just make sure that you take that advice with a grain of salt. Okay. Um, the first question, and probably the one that you're going to get asked most commonly, is tell me about yourself. You want to aim for this answer to be about 90 seconds, and you want to try to make this very conversational, like it's a story. You should try to mention where you're from, where you grew up, what medical school you graduated from. And then this is an opportunity for you to mention anything that makes you unique. So, for example, if you are a research fellow currently, or you've had a lot of teaching experience, or you've had clinical experience, and then you can also use this as an opportunity to mention anything that you find interesting about yourself as well. Some people will always ask, do I need to mention my hobbies in the tell me about yourself? And you don't have to. I think this is both mine and Dr. Assad's opinion. If you have a hobby that makes you really unique, like, you're a professional athlete or something like that, then I think it's worth mentioning just to say, oh, and an interesting thing about myself is so and is XYZ. But if you are like me and you have just kind of pretty normal hobbies or hobbies that are not super exciting, like, you like to watch sports or cook or hike or run or whatever it is, then it can be up to you whether or not you include them. So you'll hear different opinions about this, but there's no right or wrong answer, but you don't have to mention hobbies if you don't want to. Um, Practice, but don't over practice, meaning that you want to make sure that you've practiced this answer. Tell me about yourself because it's going to be the most commonly asked question that you're going to get asked. But the other thing that's important to say is that I have seen applicants who have written out a script for this. And when I ask them, tell me about yourself, it just comes across as very robotic. So they will say things like, I am so and so, I am da da ba 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 ba, and they're reading it like they're reciting off a computer screen, or even I see them have it pulled up on their screen because I can see it in the reflection of their glasses that they have a document and they're reading off the document. So you just want to come across as very dynamic. You want to come across as very natural and engaging, but you want to make sure that you've at least thought about what you're going to say and you've practiced to yourself a couple of times before you go ahead and you have your first interview. And so that's why I always recommend using bullet points to prep for this. And so that you kind of have a sense of what you're going to talk about, but you're not over rehearsed in that setting. The other thing that I just want to mention is it sometimes as an icebreaker, either, with other applicants in the evening before, they'll say, everybody say your name, say where you're from, and tell me one interesting thing about yourself. And so just be prepared that you can think of something to say if somebody says, tell me an interesting thing about yourself. So it's usually something that is not in your application. So for example, I've lived in like 4 different countries, or I can speak, 3 different languages, or in my spare time, I like to do this, this, and this. And I'm currently learning how to cook this. Um, just something interesting about yourself that I think would be a little bit unique. So just think about something that would be interesting from that sense. So the probably the other second most commonly asked question in the interview is, why are you interested in our program? And I think this is a really important question because you want to be able to demonstrate that you've done your homework and that you've actually researched the program that you're interviewed at in a fair bit of detail. So you've reviewed the program's website. A lot of programs now have social media accounts, whether it's through Twitter or Instagram or different types of social media platforms. So take a look and see what kind of activities they're doing, what teaching sessions they're doing with the residents. And a lot of programs are being a lot more intentional about advertising their program through their social media platforms as well. And you want to be as specific as possible to your answers. So you don't want to just mention generic things like, I like your program because it has strong clinical training, or it's a supportive environment, or the residents are really nice, or something like that. You want to really be specific about specific things in the program that you like. But so you can still mention that I really like that you have strong clinical training, but you want to mention specific examples of things within the program that you like. So for example, what city is the program in and how that gives you a very diverse patient population, the fact that they may have different types of curricula, like an ultrasound curriculum or a teaching skills curriculum, or they have a certain X plus Y structure, Or, if you are a budding cardiologist or endocrinologist, the fact that they have a really good match in cardiology and they have a good track record of getting residents involved in research and matching into cardiology programs. And so those are kinds of specific things that you want to mention about why you're interested in the program. The other thing that you may want to consider mentioning is that if you have personal links to the program or the area, then mention them as well. So for example, you can say that your current resident, Dr. So-and-so, is one of my friends. He's a graduate of my medical school. I've had the opportunity to talk to them extensively about your program and really have been impressed with the culture and the training and everything that he or she has told me about the program. Um, Programs may be wondering why, if you're living in a certain area, why you're interested in moving to a different area. So you may mention that you have family in the region. I wouldn't mention that as my first choice, but as part of the reasons why you're interested in the program, just to say that you have a community in the area or family, or you have personal reasons why you would be interested in the area. And this may not apply for every single program that you apply to, but if it does apply, then I think it would be worth mentioning that as well. Um, and the other piece of advice that I would always mention is try to link in what you are looking for in a program and try to link it into your answers. So, for example, as I said, if you are a budding cardiologist or a budding endocrinologist, you can say that I'm really interested in a program as somebody who's interested in cardiology in the future that will set me up for success for matching for cardiology fellowship. And so I'm really interested in the fact that your program has a really strong track record of getting residents involved in research and matching residents into great cardiology fellowships. So that kind of shows that it kind of makes the reason why you're interested in the program a little bit more personal. Okay. The next thing that you want to really think about, because this is something that you are going to be asked, very, very likely to be asked, is why you want to pursue the specialty. And I want to make sure that, for me, I'm obviously was applying for internal medicine when I was applying for residency. So I try to want to make sure that this advice is generic. I know that there are people who are applying to different specialties who are listening today. And so, you want to just make sure that you take some time between yourself, go on a walk, take some time just between yourself to really brainstorm why you want to pursue the specialty that you're applying for. And I know that some people are applying for multiple specialties, but you really want to make sure that you have specific answers for whatever specialty you're interviewing for. So take some time to really dig in and brainstorm specific reasons why you're interested in that specialty. And again, you want to be as specific as possible. You want to avoid only listing generic things that can apply to multiple specialties. So, for example, I like internal medicine because there's a wide range of patient pathology that can apply to pediatrics, to general surgery, to so many different specialties. Or saying that I like this specialty because it's a mix of inpatient and outpatient work. Again, that may be one of the reasons why you like internal medicine, or you want to be an internist because you like the fact that you can be a primary care physician and also do hospital work, or whatever. That may be one of the reasons, but just make sure that that's not the only reason. And you want to be as specific as possible. So what I mean by that is, think about specific rotations, think about specific times in medical school, specific pathologies, specific patient presentations that really made you realize that you loved internal medicine or whatever specialty you're doing. So try to think about what moment you were doing that specialty or doing that rotation that really made you think, I could see myself being happy doing this. So for example, to be specific about that, you can say that I was always drawn to internal medicine and learning about the diseases and organ system, the diseases that can affect multiple different organ systems. Went throughout my clinical rotations, I was continually drawn and most excited for my internal medicine rotations. And I particularly love this. And this was highlighted when I did my rotation in X. I just was so passionate about this. And I realized that I wanted to do this in the future. So just try to be as specific as possible based on your own experiences. Um, the other thing that I will also mention as well is that I often hear people who will try to be negative towards other specialties in your answer about this, and you really don't want to do this. So for example, I've heard some people say that, I rotated through other rotations like general surgery and OBGYN, and I just found them a little boring, or I found them a little, not that interesting, or I wasn't really excited or something like that. I would just avoid being negative towards other specialties, because as an internist or as whatever area you want to pursue, you are going to collaborate with other specialties. And believe it or not, even as a cardiologist, I still think about, things that I learned in my psychiatry rotation. I still consult these other specialties. I still think about even things that I learned on my OBGYN rotation. We take care of cardiac diseases in pregnant women, arrhythmia patients arrhythmia conditions in pregnant women. So, you really just don't want to come across, because I think that reflects very poorly on you. So rather than saying that, I think that this specialty is boring or this specialty is not interesting. Try to focus more on your particular specialty and what you like about that particular specialty and how you're excited and passionate about that particular specialty. Mention, as I said, specific experiences, rotations, future career goals, and then just always have one or two interesting cases. They may ask you to say, can you tell me about an interesting case of a patient that you took care of during your internal medicine rotation or during your cardiology rotation or whatever it is. So just you want to make sure that you have one or two interesting cases that you can talk about if asked. And whenever you mention an interesting case, you want to describe the case and also mention specifically what you learned from that case. So always make sure that you have that ready, so you're not kind of put on the spot and just panicking and trying to think about something and then nothing's coming to mind. Okay. Um, this is really important, as I have mentioned in some of the other talks that I have given or some of the YouTube videos. Anything that you put on your application, whether it's in your ERAS application or your personal statement, is fair game for them to ask you about. So they may say, I see that you did a volunteer experience where you did X, or I see that you worked on a research project X. Can you tell me a little bit more about this research experience? So this is going to be a very, very, very common question. My advice that I give people is don't spend too much time describing very detailed background to the research project. I've asked people in the past, oh, tell me about your research project on X, and they will go and talk for 2 to 3 minutes about going through the molecular background for the project. And it seems to me as though they're reading off the introduction section to the paper that they wrote about this project. So you want to think about structuring your answer as follows. So the three things that you really want to mention are a brief description of the project. So for example, you will say that I was involved in a retrospective review analyzing our outcomes after atrial fibrillation ablation at the hospital that I did my cardiology rotation at. So brief description of the project. You really want to mention your specific role in that project, because sometimes it can be very hard for interviewers to know what exactly you did in that research project. So for example, you want to say that my role was chart reviewing 200 patients and doing the data collection, as well as cleaning up the database and assisting with the data analysis and assisting with drafting of the manuscript. If you did a meta-analysis, you want to talk about how your role, for example, might have been doing the initial search and deciding which papers need to be included by reading the abstract and reading the paper. So you want to mention specifically what your role was in the project. If you are a research fellow and you are involved in recruiting patients or getting things organized for them to get involved in the research experience, mention specifically what your role was in that project. And then most importantly, you want to mention what you gained from the experience. So mention things like, this was a wonderful experience for me because it taught me how to perform a meta-analysis. It taught me how to do chi-squared and t-tests. It taught me uh, the importance of being accurate in data collection and how to build a database. Whatever it is that you learned from that experience, you want to show that you have gained something from that experience that you will take moving forward. This is also an opportunity, and this may not apply for everybody, that if something came out of that research experience, meaning that you got a presentation or a publication, then this would be a good opportunity to say that, again, this was a wonderful experience because I was able to present that work at this conference, or we are currently writing up the paper and we are getting ready to submit it to Journal X, or it is currently under review at Journal X. Because again, a lot of people get involved in research projects that don't manifest or don't amount to everything. So if you were able to complete the research project and get it to a point where it was ready for a presentation or a publication, even if it's not published yet, then I think it's worth just mentioning that because it shows that the research project was completed. Okay. Behavioral questions are something that I think a lot of people get very nervous about. There are common scenarios, you may or may not get asked about a behavioral type question. So for example, tell me about a time when there was a miscommunication that you observed in the clinical setting. Tell me about a time that you dealt with an angry patient or an angry colleague. Tell me about a time and it can be positive or negative. Tell me about a time that you worked well in a team, or tell me about the time where you were a leader. There are many examples on the Match Guy website. If you just search common interview questions, there's a list of 200 plus interview questions that's freely available on the Match Guy's website. So you can review them and try to think of some scenarios for the common ones. The advice that I give for people when I'm preparing for interviews with people is you don't need to necessarily have some sort of crazy type of behavioral scenario where, somebody got injured, the police got called or something like that. I think people are really trying to rack their brains for some sort of crazy scenario. You just want to think about something that matches the question that you are getting asked. You want to try to structure your answer as follows. Number one, you want to have a brief description of what happened. So, for example, you can say, when I was in my internal medicine rotation, I was involved in taking care of a patient who this, and this happened to them, and they ended up getting very angry, and this happened. So you want to have a very brief description of what happened. The more important thing that you want to focus on is how you handled the situation, and then what you learned from the experience, and or what you would do differently in a future scenario, or saying that this was an important experience for me because it taught me that in scenarios like this, it's really important to remain calm and to communicate effectively, and to communicate calmly with any colleagues, and that you can often de-escalate the situation verbally. So this is how you want to structure your answer. I've seen people just spend a lot of time describing in a great amount of detail what happened in the scenario, and then they just end it and they don't describe how the situation was handled, what you learned from the experience, or what you would do differently. And those are really important things that you want to highlight. The other thing that I just want to mention as well is that in a scenario like this, if there was a situation where they ask you to talk about a situation where a patient nearly got harmed or there was a near miss, just always mention what happened to the patient, because it shows that you really care about the patient. You say, thankfully in this scenario, this happened to the patient and they were fine. And just ending that with what happened to the patient just shows that you are a kind person, and you're always thinking about patients and not just about yourself. It's a relatively common question. You may or may not get asked this, but mentioning a strength or a weakness, or they may ask you to, what is your greatest strength and your greatest weakness? If you're asked to mention one strength, then just please mention one strength. I can't tell you the number of times that people um, I'll say, can you give me your greatest strength? And people mention three or four strengths that are very different from each other. So again, just be mindful to answer the question. I've also, I can't tell you how many times I've told people to say, mention what's your greatest strength and greatest weakness, and they'll just talk about those strengths and they don't talk about their weakness. And I'll have to prompt them again to talk about that weakness. So just make sure to answer any question. You might think that it's very obvious to answer the question that you get asked, but the number of times that this happened is just really, really high. Another way that somebody may ask you this is, and I got asked this on an interview recently, is what words would your friends or colleagues use to describe you? And so just, think of positive words like, I think they would describe me as somebody who's always very positive, somebody who's uplifting, somebody who's a good team player, somebody who is very dedicated or diligent, just try to use some of these good and positive adjectives to describe yourself. the weakness question always gets people a little bit nervous as well. Common weaknesses that people will mention are things like I tend to be a little bit of a perfectionist, or I tend to sometimes get very focused in the details, and or I have a tendency to say yes to everything that I get asked to do. I think that those are fine. I think people try to get very um, unique and try to think of a weakness that perhaps is not cliche, or perhaps is unique from other people. And I think I would probably err more on the side of doing a weakness that is more common than doing something that is a little bit more unique. Unless it's something that you can spin positively, I would just be careful with that, because the number of times people will mention a weakness that would cause concern. Like I've heard somebody said to me while practicing, "Oh, my weakness is that I tend to get very angry when things don't go my way, or I tend to just yell sometimes when I feel like I'm not being heard." And those sorts of things, you'd be surprised. You would think that nobody would say that, but actually people have said that, and those can kind of be a little bit of a red flag. And so you always want to mention, I would just rather you say something that's a little bit more generic and cliche, than, try to get really unique with that answer. But the more important thing, again, with your weakness is to mention that you are aware of that weakness and what you are doing or what you have done to address or overcome that weakness. So, for example, if you say that my weakness is that I tend to say yes to everything, you can say that I'm aware of this and I'm now more cognizant of what is on my plate. And I communicate openly now, if I feel that something would be adding too much to my plate, to say that I am really thankful for the opportunity that you have given me, but I think right now I have a little bit too much on my plate, and I would worry that I wouldn't be able to give this the attention that it deserves. I have done this in the past where somebody has asked me to do a research project that I just don't have the bandwidth to do. And what I will do is mention that exactly, be thankful and appreciative of the opportunity, say that I don't have the bandwidth right now to give it the attention that it deserves. And you can even just go one step further and say that I actually have some colleagues who may be interested. If you don't mind, I can ask them, or I can put you in contact with them, because then that shows that you're also a team player as well. Just some things to bear in mind here. Some of the tougher questions that I think people worry about, especially if you have any extenuating circumstances on your application, like let's say you failed an exam or failed something in medical school, or some people even, were asked to leave residency and are applying again for a different residency. Be prepared that if you have any of these extenuating circumstances that are mentioned on your application, and again, this doesn't apply to everybody, but just be prepared to talk about that extenuating circumstance. So you don't want to seem like you're caught off guard if you are asked to talk more about that. And this actually may be in your advantage. You may be able to give additional insight and additional context that may not be apparent on your application. The thing that when people that I'm working with have some of these extenuating circumstances, and when we practice talking about these things before their interview, is I just will say that, briefly describe what happened, but don't dwell too much on all the nitty-gritty details of the scenario. Don't dwell too much, or don't seem like, you're super embarrassed, or you're like really nervous, or you're hesitant to talk about it. You can just say that, unfortunately, this, and this happened. Unfortunately, around the time that I was preparing for step one, I had a lot of stressors, including this, and this. It was just really unfortunate timing, and it unfortunately led to me not being successful with step one the first time that I took it. But you want to focus more on what you did to overcome it and how you did moving forward. And so you want to mention on the specific steps that you took to make sure that the second time, for example, that you took the exam, that you made sure to pass it, how you changed your study strategy, how you, whatever you did to make sure that you have now overcome that scenario, and how you have grown as an individual moving forward. I've even heard some people mention things like, ultimately, I try to change any negative experience that I've encountered into a growing opportunity or an opportunity to get better. And now I approach these things differently by doing X, Y, or Z. So you just want to make sure that you show that you're always focused on the positive and how you are doing things differently to move forward. Just some parting thoughts. Again, as I mentioned, it's a lot less stressful than you think it will be. It's going to be very, very conversational. It's going to be, people, some people, I know a lot of people probably haven't had their first interview yet, but after you've had your first couple of interviews, you will recognize that it's a lot less stressful than you think it is. Be yourself, show that you are a kind, mature person, somebody who can communicate well. Part of the interview experience is they have seen everything on paper. They know your exam scores. They know how you did in medical school. They've read your personal statement. They've known about your volunteer and research and clinical experiences. But this is an opportunity for them to get to know you as a person and for them to see, is this somebody that I could see myself or I could see our residents working with for the next 3+ years, and somebody that I think we would be happy working with, somebody who's going to be kind and a good team player, and somebody that, we'd be fine working with on night shifts or 24-hour shifts or in periods of time where they may be sleep deprived or tired. So you really just want to smile, show that you're a kind, mature person, that you can communicate well. Remember that anything in your personal statement or ERAS application is fair game for a question. So if you worked on a research project several years ago that you don't remember the details of, I've been really surprised. Even recently in an interview, somebody asked me a question about a research project that I did in medical school 10 years ago that has nothing to do with my specialty. And so if you've done a project, somebody may ask you a question, not because they're being mean, but it may be that, they have an interest in that topic or it just caught their eye while they were reviewing your application. And so, just be mindful that if you forgot the details of something, just read any papers that you've written, read any abstracts or research papers. It's okay if you don't remember every little detail, just say, you know what, this was some time ago. I don't remember every detail, but I can get back to you, if you'd like. But just so that you're not caught off guard because a lot of people, I think, if they're asked a question that they don't know the answer to, it'll kind of throw them off guard and it'll kind of ruin them for the remainder of the interview. So you just want to make sure that you give yourself every opportunity to come across very strongly. Always have some questions prepared for the interviewer. Try to make sure that these questions are ones that are not clearly answered on the program's website. So you don't want to ask the program director something like, what rotations do the residents do in their first year? And it's clearly laid out on the website. But you can use this as an opportunity to show that you have reviewed the program's website. So for example, if they mention something in not a lot of detail, so for example, you can say that, let's say that on the program website, it says something like, there are opportunities for rotations abroad or for away rotations. You can say, I reviewed your website and I noticed that it was mentioned that there are opportunities to do this. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or where have residents gone in the past? Or how have residents taken advantage of that in the past? So just you can ask follow-up questions on things that are written on the website, and that demonstrates that you've actually looked at the website and you've done your homework as well. So just some additional resources. There are a lot of resources out there through the Match Guy and through others. There is, as I mentioned on the website, 200+ potential interview questions that are freely available on the Match Guy website. The Match Guy YouTube page has a lot of interviews and a lot of mock interviews with applicants and with people who are through the Match Guy who are tutors and who help, train people. You have the opportunity to book sessions with us if you'd like. You don't feel we're not telling you that you have to do this. If you have somebody that you trust, a friend or a mentor who can do that, I know that applications are expensive and things like that. So you don't feel like you have to do that. It's not an obligation, but just wanted to let you know that that resource is available should you wish to take advantage of that. But just try to practice it with a friend or a colleague or a mentor just before your first interview. Um, Dr. Assad and I shot this video a couple weeks ago, and we kind of went through a mock interview and kind of talked about our experiences afterwards. So you can check this out. This is freely available on YouTube, as well as a number of other videos that are freely available on YouTube as well. So thank you for listening. I am going to unshare my screen and happy to take any questions. So question that has come up is time limit for behavioral questions. I think, there's no right or wrong answer for time limit, but I would say in general, you want to try to limit all of your answers to about, at most 2 minute. Um, so just to be mindful of, not talking for too long. If it goes a little bit over 2 minutes, I think that's fine, but just in general, try to have all your answers to be about 2 minutes. Next question that comes up is, do you think a joke here or there is inappropriate? Um, so I think you want to be very, very careful with jokes because, and I've actually heard program directors mention this specifically. I think, you just don't know um, the what things people will find offensive or what things people won't find offensive. So you just want to be as careful as possible with jokes. So some program directors will mention that it's probably best to avoid using jokes. Um, and the one time where I think that you can include a joke is what they call self-deprecating humor, which is where you kind of make fun of yourself a little bit. And so you can say, oh, well, you can just kind of like, if you're talking about your experience or something that happened, you can say that. And of course, I'll be the kind of person to like trip as I'm walking in or something like that. Like, just to kind of mention that you're making fun of yourself, like that self-deprecating humor, I think is fine. But you just want to be really, really careful. And especially with mentions of politics, religion, or things that you just don't know what things people are going to find offensive or not. So in general, the advice is just try to avoid jokes if at all possible. So let's see. Oh, I think a lot of people. Sorry, I'm just looking at some of these other questions. So, how do you think we should introduce ourselves and what should the general structure of our answer be? So, this will be recorded, so you're welcome to kind of review the recording of this. But essentially, in the tell me about yourself, you want to mention well, where you're from, where you grew up, where you went to medical school. If you graduated from medical school recently, then I think it's always nice to say I graduated from medical school like in 2021, 2022, especially for IMGs. That just shows that you're a recent grad and then kind of what you're up to right now. So I'm currently a research fellow, I'm currently an intern, I'm currently whatever like you're doing in your home country. And then just mentioning briefly any type of unique experiences, whether it's teaching, research, or clinical that or anything else that's interesting about yourself. If you have an interesting or a unique hobby, you can mention it. If you don't, then you don't feel like you have to. Try to practice it, try to limit it to 90 seconds. Use bullet points to structure your answer when you're preparing so it doesn't come across as over prepared. But that would be my advice, and you can review the recording as well as the YouTube video, the interview that I had with Dr. Assad. It gives more detail about that. Um, if I'm stumped with a question, can I tell me an interview? Can I tell the interviewer, can you give me a few seconds to think about that? How many seconds should I allot? Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but I think that you can say some things that people say to kind of buy themselves a little bit of time is, oh, thank you for that question, or oh, that's really actually an interesting question. Let me think about that actually, when I was in, and then you can just use those few seconds to kind of buy you some time to think. It's okay to pause. I think it's totally fine to pause, but you don't want to pause for more than like a few seconds because otherwise it just looks a little bit awkward. So that's why it's always important to think about the commonly asked questions that are available on the Match Guys website, or something like, one or two interesting cases from your rotation or something like that. Try to think about that beforehand. But I'm not going to lie, I definitely have been in a scenario where I've been asked a question that I did not anticipate. Um, but it's okay to take a minute to or a few seconds to think about that. An example was, somebody mentioned once, I said, "Oh, I really enjoy cooking." And they were like, "Oh, what's your favorite fall recipe?" And I was like, "Oh man, like I don't know specifically about a fall recipe, but that's just an example." But or if you mention that you like reading, be prepared that they may ask you what's the last book that you read or what's your favorite book or something like that. So uh, so, are there any downsides to interviewing early or late, like January in the interview season? So, I would say in general, if you have a program that is your top choice, you this is a little bit difficult because sometimes you don't really have a lot of choice as to when you're going to want to schedule the interview because you may only be limited to one or two dates. But I would say in general, if you have the opportunity to do a few practice interviews or a few interviews at programs that are lower on your preference list, that just gives you an opportunity to kind of have a few practice interviews before you actually do the interview at your program that is your number one choice. Um, I don't think it really matters, when you do your interviews. There's pros and cons to interviewing earlier versus later. So pros of interviewing earlier is that, the interviewers and everybody is still really fresh. Pros of interviewing later is that when they're doing their rank list, it's a little bit more fresh in their mind. So honestly, there's pros and cons of each, and just choose the interview date that works best for you. So the next question is, in tell me about yourself, should we keep it strictly non-medical? Is it okay to repeat stuff from the CV? So you don't want to regurgitate everything from your CV, but I think the tell me about yourself, a lot of times the people who are interviewing 10 plus people, and it's really hard for them to keep track of who's who. And in some minority of programs, they actually tell people not to look at the application before they interview people so that they're not biased. So the tell me about yourself should be a very broad and quick story-like description of where you grew up, where you went to medical school, what opportunities you've had that are unique in terms of teaching, research, et cetera. If you want a specific example of how I structured my answer, you can look at the YouTube video that I did with Dr. Assad a couple weeks ago. Um, I'm specifically only answering, just in interest of time, only answering questions about the interview. I know some people are asking about letter of interest and letter of intent. That's a whole separate topic. Um, Similarly, post-interview communication, I always think that it's nice to write a thank you email to everybody that you've interviewed with. Especially at the very least, the program director and the associate program director, unless they specifically tell you not to. So I interviewed at a program where they said, we do not want you to send any type of thank you emails, or the interviewers will say, I get so many thank you emails and I don't have the time to respond to them. Please don't send any thank you emails. So if they specifically tell you not to send a thank you email, don't send a thank you email, because then, you want to be respectful of their wishes as well. But if they don't, then I would say, then it's always nice to send a brief thank you email to make it specific. If you mention something specifically about the conversation, you say, I really enjoyed talking to you about X, Y, and Z. Then I think that would be something that is worth mentioning. But have a brief thank you email. Be very careful. A lot of people copy and paste things, and they'll say, dear Dr. So and so, and they'll send it to the wrong person. So just be careful, proofread it before you send it. But I think it's always nice just to send a brief thank you email unless they specifically tell you not to. So the question, tell me something unique about you. Does it mean something interesting about you personally or something unique professionally? It could be either. It doesn't really matter. So, you could say, I lived in three different countries. I can speak three different languages. I um, am currently learning how to cook this. Or you can say that, something unique about me is that you know, I have X years of experience in this or whatever. It's just something that you think is unique about you that not every applicant will have. Um, Can we be asked political questions? Probably not. Most likely you're not going to get asked political questions. It's very unlikely that you will get asked questions about, your views on certain medical topics that are associated with politics, like, abortion or things like that. And I would try to steer clear of mentioning those as well. I can't say never because you never know what's going to happen. But I would say in terms of generally, it is very, very, very unlikely that you are going to get asked about those things. I've heard sometimes people interviewing you haven't really read through your application well enough. Do you think it might be a good idea to include highlights of your CV, number of publications, months of US clinical experience, volunteer experiences, et cetera? I think that you can weave those in to that your answer in a way that comes across very naturally. So, for example, I've heard some people say that I'm so and so. I originally grew up in India and I graduated from medical school X in 2021. After graduating from medical school, I did a year of internship in India, and then I moved to the US with my significant other, and I became really, really interested in pursuing residency in the US. And so I was able to complete 6 months of clinical experience in the US, rotating through different hospitals. I'm now currently working at X, Y, and Z, and really, really passionate about this. And I'm really excited to apply for internal medicine because I'm interested in becoming primary care doctor in the future, like whatever. So you can mention it briefly through your thing, but you don't have to regurgitate. I have 20 publications and 11 abstracts, and this, that, or the other. If you are currently a research fellow and you've had the opportunity to do a lot of things, you can mention and say that in my current role as a research fellow, I've had the opportunity to work on a number of projects, including this, and I'm really grateful because it has resulted in wonderful opportunities like conference presentations and publications that have been a really great experience for me. So there are ways that you can kind of weave those into your answer without coming across as if you're just regurgitating your CV. So, one question was when talking about your weakness, can you talk about personal weaknesses like I'm a shy person? So, I think that that's okay to mention, but maybe just phrase it a little bit differently. So, one example that I have given people is, and I think a lot of people will relate to that, is you can say that I. You don't want to say that I'm super shy because then somebody may be worried about you taking a stand or being confident enough to talk to patients or things like that. But one example of a weakness that some people have mentioned that I think a lot of people can relate to is, throughout early on in my medical school or high school, I would always be a little bit nervous, about public speaking and public communication and giving presentations. But so I would always be a little bit nervous, and I recognize that that is a really important part of being a doctor and working in an academic setting. You're going to be doing teaching, you're going to be giving talks and conferences, and so I've taken it upon myself to take advantage of any opportunity I have to do public speaking and to step outside my comfort zone. I've talked to people and gotten advice on how to overcome that, and I've gotten a lot better at it and less nervous about it. And something that I want to continue to practice moving forward. So that's like a nice example to show that you were maybe a little bit shy doing public speaking, but you recognize that and you're working on doing that better in the future. So, a question that I think is very common is, should we talk about research experiences when interviewing for a small community program, which is mostly clinical focus, or is it best avoided? So, I would say that you want to, and Dr. Assad and I talk about this in the video, you want to maybe tailor the answer that you're giving to whatever program that you're talking about. So, for example, if you are a research fellow and you're doing a ton of research, or you have done a PhD in your home country or whatever, and you are interviewing at a program that is very, very, very clinically heavy and like a community program, I think the thing that you want to mention is um, focus more on your clinical experiences rather than your research experiences. But if you're interviewing at an academic program, you want to focus a little bit more on your research experiences. So try to tailor your answer to the program that you're interviewing at so that you can mention that. Because I definitely have heard people who have done a lot of research, they're interviewing for a small community program, and all they talk about is the research that they have done. In that situation, you really want to emphasize to the program that yes, I'm a research fellow and I'm, passionate and I've done research, but I'm also strong clinically by doing X, Y, and Z, number of clinical rotations. And you also want to mention things like, I recognize that residency is clinical and I want to be the best clinician that I could possibly be. Potentially would like to integrate research in my practice in the future, but right now my primary focus is to be the strongest clinician that I could possibly be. And so that's how you can demonstrate that, yes, I've done research, but my primary goal and focus is to be as strong clinically as I could possibly be. Is changing your interview date several times going to look bad, or do they not know? They probably won't know. Most of the time it's a program coordinator, but you just don't want to come across as annoying as you're emailing them several times. I think it's okay to reschedule once. But I think it's also important to know that a lot of times the interviews just fill up and it may not be possible to reschedule, but I think it's fine to reschedule once. Importantly, you don't want to cancel an interview less than a week before the interview because I think that tends to look bad. And that's the advice that my program director got given to me. And so if you realize that, you're really not interested in a program or you don't want to go to a program, I think it's okay to cancel, but as long as it's more than a week, ideally 2 weeks out. All right. Just some of these questions are repeated, so I just wanted to make sure that I answer all the unique questions. So one question was if you had kind of a extenuating circumstance, should you address that yourself or just wait to be asked? Probably would err on the side of just wait to be asked about that. Um, I highly doubt that they're going to ask you a political question on election day or ask you who you would vote for or something like that. I just don't think that that would be the case. Yeah, I don't think that changing your interview schedule twice should impact your interview. Um, yep. So I think one question that comes up is about signaling as well. Um, is if you're at a program that you've signaled, then I think, that can be when they ask you, why are you interested in our program? Then you can say that, yep, I love your program about, again, just be as specific as possible. But then you can also say like, and for these reasons, I was really excited to signal at your program. I think it would be really awkward for them to ask you, why you didn't signal us. And I think, you can say that something along the lines of, you know, there's so many great programs. I wish we were able to signal more than X number of programs. And it's really hard to be able to review all the programs in detail before you do your signaling. And I've really just, as I've reviewed and learned more about your program, you can then focus on how it fits in with what you want and why you're passionate about that program and just kind of steer away from that and just use that as an opportunity to talk about what you like about the program and how it fits in with your career goals, rather than trying to come up with a reason why you didn't signal them or why other programs are better than them or something like that. Um, so I think that brings us to the top of the hour. So I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. And so thank you everyone for joining today, and good luck with everyone with the interview sessions and the interview season. And thank you so much for tuning in today.